Welcome again to Asia in the Limelight. It's a pleasure to see you for the second day of our event. For those of you who have just joined us, Asia in the Limelight is a new chapter in a series of online events called From Home Export Days, organized by Le Bureau Export, the French music export office. If you're curious about yesterday's panel, check out our website as the replay is now available. Today's panel is called Distribution, Platforms, Marketing, and Finding an Audience for Your Projects. It is moderated by Priya Dewan, Asia Director of the Orchard and founder of Gig Life Pro in Singapore. Thank you very much for joining us, and stay tuned for our upcoming events. Take it away, Priya.
Hello, my name is Priya, and I am very excited to be here today with some great music industry professionals from across Asia to share a little bit more about how French artists can reach their audiences out in this part of the world. I'd love to start with the second largest music market in the world, according to the IFPI, and with Mr. Iichiro Noda. Could you please introduce yourself and your company? Oops, I think you're on mute still. Sorry, Iichiro.
Hi, my name is Iichiro Noda, and we're from Japan, and I am the CEO of TuneCore Japan. And we actually, can I just explain our service as well in the record?
Of course, please.
So we launched our service in Japan since 2012, so it's been around 8 years now, and we are now one of the biggest aggregator in Japan right now, for especially for digital music. And we have a lot of independent artists using our service right now. And as most of you know, that Japan is a little bit unique market in a music industry, and 70% is CD physical basis, but streaming services are now growing. So yeah, I hope to talk about more later on the details.
So what platforms are in Japan to reach your audience? What digital platforms are popular in Japan right now?
So for the streaming services, there are two big ones. One is obviously Apple Music, and second one is Line Music, and this is probably the local domestic platforms. And those are the number two, and followed by Spotify, Amazon, and recently YouTube Music has grown pretty fast since last year.
Great. And what about social platforms? What social platforms are used most in Japan?
Okay, so our chat application is going to be Line. So most like 95 to like almost 100% people use this Line. Not even the older people as well. And for business, we actually use Facebook. We don't use that much LinkedIn because people don't speak in English. So our business chat is usually Facebook. And recently, Instagram for teenagers and TikTok for teenagers. It's probably the same for everywhere, I guess.
Great. So you mentioned English is not used very much in Japan. So how important is localization for content in the Japan market?
Well, yeah, you don't need to like translate everything to Japanese in the sense of metadata, because people can read the English. So, but it's very important to like tell our audience, our Japanese people, through the media. Maybe you guys can use like Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, and maybe Twitter, even the Twitter. Those SNS platform is going to be one of the most promotional tool, even if you want to reach the Japanese people. That works.
Got it. Great, thank you. So from Japan, I'd love to jump over to the fastest growing music market in Asia, which is Vietnam. Esther, would you mind introducing yourself and sharing a little bit more about POPs?
Sure. It's great to be here. POTS is one of the, I would say, largest music label slash aggregator and distributor of media content, music. We've been around for over 12 years and really understand the market and what's going on. But we also have operations in Thailand as well, growing music business over there. So it's pretty exciting, but very unique market here in Vietnam for sure.
Great. So what platforms do kids in Vietnam use to discover and consume music?
Hands down, it's YouTube as the #1 platform. Followed by YouTube, I would say would be the two local players, which is Zing or NCT. And then following far behind would be Spotify and iTunes.
Okay. And in Vietnam as well, how important is localization of content?
Actually, it's not important to localize. I think the most important is to be authentic, have a connection with the fan base or their user base, and being accessible, I would say, through social media to the audience. I think once you're able to show the authenticity and a relation to, building some kind of relationship with the fan base here, then that's what really matters the most.
Okay, great. Move over to the rest of Southeast Asia. Jon, sitting in Singapore, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, hey guys, my name is Jon. I'm from Singapore. I run Zendyll Records and also a member of the Soundblows, which is a band coming out of Singapore. At Zendyll, we're a music agency, so we do primarily artist services and label services. We have a production facility as well, recording studios, producers, songwriters. So yeah, we work with our networks over in Stockholm and Los Angeles as well, to produce songs for artists in all over the world, in Korea, in the US and over here in Southeast Asia as well. And on top of that, we do music publishing and we do all sorts of different artist services as well. So we help artists do their live shows, find them the band, find them the right lighting designer, find them the right venue, find them the right promoter. So yeah, that's pretty much some of our core business. And on top of that, we do brands. So we work with a lot of brands to help them market their products using music, whether it's live music or recorded music or commercial work.
Wow, yeah. One-stop shop. So how are you getting your content out to all the platforms across Asia? And what are the most relevant platforms for Southeast Asia, in your opinion?
I think, Southeast Asia, in terms of the music market, to me, is very divided. I think every country, even within the country itself, there's a lot of different ways people consume on different platforms. I think in Singapore, Spotify would be the biggest DSP. And I think most people are on YouTube, and lately the younger generation is on TikTok. I think every platform, in my opinion, right now, kind of has their own specific way of pushing music out, for a different target audience and also for different types of artists. In my opinion, when it comes to bringing music into Singapore, I think one of the best and most efficient ways is still via Spotify and also local collaborations.
Awesome. Thanks. And you're distributed through...
Yes, and we're for Zendyll, we're distributed via Belief, but we also service we also service Warner Music, Sony Music, and Universal Music for their artists as well. Just that we don't distribute the tracks.
Awesome, cool.
Yeah.
And Natasha, please introduce yourself.
Hi. My name is Natasha. I'm the head of label relations for Deezer in Asia Pacific. Deezer is a music streaming service that is available in 180 countries worldwide. And currently we have about 120 partnerships with different hardware brands. It could be telcos. We also have a lot of direct deals with major and indie record labels and a lot of distribution companies. So yeah, we are currently pretty huge and active in a lot of Europe, France being obviously our massive #1 market, but we're also very active in Latin America, and Brazil is currently super strong for us. Yeah. Oh yes, and also we've been doing a lot of activities with a lot of artists and labels in Middle East and MENA.
Oh wow, great.
Yeah.
And what about Asia? What has been your strategy for the Asian music market?
So we all know that the DSP market in Asia is super crowded. So we have our own strategy, and we're currently working very closely with a lot of the labels that we identify that have very strong potential for exporting into all of our other markets that we do well in globally. So for example, one of the Japanese music and Korean music has been identified as an up-and-coming genre that is doing really well for us. So K-pop is doing really well in Latin America. So we're working closely with all of these local markets in building an export strategy for their local content.
Very cool. Which kind of takes me back to Jon, what you were mentioning a bit about collaborations that you touched on. What do you see the opportunity there, and what do you see the value of collaborations?
I definitely think there's a lot of value, especially if the collaboration comes in organically. I think it's not so much like labels and labels putting people together, but rather forming a personal relationship amongst the artists, whether they're indie artists or signed to the label. I think in Singapore, the industry is still very young, so there isn't a very clear divide between independent artists and signed artists in that sense. I think there are still people still associate themselves as more of a community. So just to be able to enter that community at this point of time is still relatively simple. I think there isn't really artists that are too they won't work with new artists kind of vibe. So I think it's quite straightforward to reach out. I think on my end as Zendyll, we met a lot of artists via Instagram. People just sending us DM via Instagram, and we end up doing collaborations with them. We end up flying them to Singapore, for events and songwriting camps and stuff like that. So I think the most important thing I would say is just reach out, and you really never know.
Yeah, awesome. And Iichiro, in Japan, is it the same? Are Japanese artists open to doing collaborations with Western artists? Are there particular genres that you think work better?
Yes, I think it's just started here in Japan, the co-writing process. It's not many people has done it before. I mean, only the major, the signed artist has been doing collaborating with overseas artists in the past. But for the independent artists, it's just started. But we've seen the move right now for co-writing. And I heard from the artists like hip hop, they are asking for the tracks from overseas. They do the DM directly to the track maker, and then they just do the collaboration pieces and just deliver everything. And I think that's working, and it started to work right now. And it's experimental right now in Japan. And not many people can do this in Japan because of the language problem, as I said before. But still, if the artists can reach out to their Instagram or Twitter account directly, the artists are checking. So I think that there's opportunity doing like the organic DM thing is going on right now.
And specifically, you think for beat makers to reach out to MCs as like a big opportunity. Great. And in Vietnam as well, are artists open to collaborations? Are there specific genres that you think would work? Is there a good approach to that?
Yeah, no, I think that artists are definitely open to collaboration. I would say pop music or rap, hip hop is a really good genre for that. For example, like one of our top artists did a music video with Snoop Dogg, 192 million views. So no, I think that the country is quite receptive. The fans and or music lovers in Vietnam are very open to different types of music and embraces all kinds of collaborations. I think artists a little bit depending on the level of artists, or if they're indie artists or more established A-type A-list artists, then they're a little bit more particular about who they collab with. But in general, everyone's quite open.
So if an artist had a strong home base following, though, you feel like that would be easier to leverage a collaboration and do some cross promotion?
Correct. Either a home base or maybe they have a strong following in Vietnam, right? So there's a lot of Korean artists who have a huge following here in Vietnam or US or whatnot. So yeah.
Interesting. And Natasha, can Deezer help in this way at all? Identify artists who would be good collaborators across the market?
Yeah, I think as a DSP, the huge benefit that we do have is access to a lot of data, and we can access which artist is doing well in what market, what other markets are they doing well in, and I think that's probably that usually for us as well is like a starting point for the kind of artists that we do campaigns with. And then obviously there are certain factors that we would consider, along the line, because the first step is identifying the artist, but also our strategy would be to speak to the local teams within that market, because we find that it's definitely necessary to have the support of the local teams when it comes to social media support. Are they doing, what other campaigns are they running? Can they commit to homepage features, or can they commit to banners on the local homepages? And I think that's for us definitely something that we consider when we are working with an artist, or how can we export them successfully in that local market, because it's really difficult to do it if it's just relying on just a DSP or do the work. Yeah.
So they have to come to you as well with sort of a plan and some data to back it up, basically.
Yeah, I think it's definitely on our side as well. We're definitely taking a lot of a creative role in coming out with a strategy, coming out with a campaign. But I think the artist commitment or the artist management commitment in definitely providing that access to whether it's their own platform to their fans is something that we have found super like a great factor in defining whether the campaign or would be successful or not.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So, moving over to branding and cultural relevance, Jon, you mentioned that you've done a lot of work with brand collaborations in music. Can you chat a little bit more about that? And if there's an opportunity there?
Yeah, I think for 2019 especially, I think one thing that I realized was a lot of fashion brands and a lot of fashion magazines were looking to use music as a tool to help promote their clothes or to promote their culture. So there was a lot of music and fashion events last year in Singapore in 2019. So at Music Matters, the music conference that happened in September last year, Zainal, we did the Made in Singapore showcase where we actually got Hugo Boss to come in to sponsor the event. We curated a full lineup. We actually had support from their head office back in Germany as well to push out the event, and that they also they got Liam Payne to be the ambassador. So it was kind of like a start to building that relationship. Of course, now in 2020, because of the virus, it's a little bit different. And I think at the same time, even though fashion brands are taking that step backwards, from working more with music, from what I see, but I think a lot of government agencies here in Singapore are starting to step up to say like, hey, we can't let our music culture die. So yeah, I think it really depends on which time of the year or which time period that would be the best strategy to push it forward. I think in terms of brands, they always want eyeballs. I think that's the the thing, and for us, I think for people who work in music, we want listeners. So, I guess like the same person can be both listeners and giving eyeballs at the same time. So there is that nature of collaboration right there. So I guess it's always trying to find what is that good middle ground, for both parties to push their agenda, and at the same time, I think at the end of the day, providing a certain sense of entertainment for the listeners and the consumers themselves. So yeah, I think in general, I would say like it's on my part, what I like to do is that I actually like to talk to brands who never thought of using music as a platform, and kind of introducing them more about music and culture and how, music is part of everybody's lives from a very, very young age, and it slowly grows, and I think backing up with data, that's something that would really, really help, to show them like, okay, like the same song, might work for this demographic, but might not work for another demographic, whether it's age or whether it's educational level, there are a lot of different factors. So being able to break that down for the brands, and trying to align that with what they want to do and what they hope to do, that really helps us with our pitches and our projects that we work with them on.
Yeah, just to add in, I think Vietnam is quite the same. I think Vietnam really uses and leverages music as a way to connect with people and to invoke an emotion together with the artist as well to their brand, right? So music is probably one of the top categories in which brands leverage in terms of connecting with their consumer base. So it's quite exciting to see that happen quite a bit here in Vietnam.
Cool. Are there particular like brands or examples or types of brands that you see it using this most effectively?
I would say the FMCGs are quite active in it. Everything from like the Unilevers to PS, or local brands like Vina Milk, who are quite active, especially on the kids side, reaching out, connecting with the kids through music.
And is that more sync based, or is it like actually engagement with the artist or involvement with the artist?
I've seen both, where one is either it's just a plain PPL, right? Or two, it's actually an interaction with the brand or with the artist. So I've seen it go both ways.
Awesome. And how do people tap into that from overseas? Is that something that you provide, or are there agencies?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I guess it could work with us, and we would first need to find that connection with the artist and with another local artist, or with the artist and the viewers or consumers, listeners here in Vietnam. If we're able to show that kind of connection, then it's easy to do that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That's awesome. So the other thing I wanted to talk about is this whole especially as we're here speaking to a group of French music industry and trying to make it more relatable to the French industry, is how familiar is your market with French culture and French music to begin with? So, for example, in Japan. You're on mute, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, it's very hard to know the exact culture of French music or French artists. So I think good thing to start with is to share more info through the media, and that can it's not that hard right now because all the internet and web media is there. But it's just that both of us, like Japanese media, is not actually using their media as foreign artists introduction and everything. So I think we can start off with like sharing the information of like artists activities and that kind of media to Japan, Japanese media that actually does a lot of music information. And I think there are a few good medias like Natalie, and there are a few music media phenomenal, and like it's very small, but it's all like each genre has each media's online website, and so people can probably like reach out to those medias and then like translate some of the artist information there to start with, so that people can understand their stories about the artist, because if we just listen to the music from the playlist, it's very easy. But I don't think it doesn't work that way when the fan becomes real fan of the artist. So it's I think that's a good way, and also the YouTube would work well because Asians in Japan watches quite a lot of YouTube. So those using the translation function for YouTube, that would also make sense for Japanese to be chat. But yeah, but it's really hard to find the actual video of French artists in Japan. So it's probably better. Even if you have a channel, it's hard to bring the people, Japanese people, to that channel. So maybe beforehand, before the YouTube channel, maybe you should do with a local Japanese music media, and then go to the YouTube channel. I think that's the step. And I think it takes time, and it doesn't go directly to the streaming plays right now, but I think that's how we should. I mean, it's not just the French artists, but like as I said, I talk to Japanese artists as well in the same way, in the other way around. That no one knows about you, so you should know more about the local media and that kind of thing. If you want to go out to certain countries, you have to learn more about their country, what's happening there. So that's one step that I'm telling the independent artists to do in the first place.
That's a good point. And YouTube's a great storytelling channel as well.
Yes, you can see visual too. So yeah.
Yeah. That's great. And I know I just said French music, which is very broad. There's a lot of different styles of French music. Natasha, with all the data that you have access to, what do you think? What genres of French music do you think have a better chance of connecting in certain markets across Asia? Oops, you're on mute, Sudi.
I think hip hop and rap, French hip hop and rap, does pretty well outside of France. At Deezer, we created this like a French, I would say, like album where we recorded a bunch of French artists and put it in a record album, and we found that did well in France alone, in France itself. But when I heard it, I felt like it definitely had a lot of potential to carry into Southeast Asia, and so that's one genre. Another genre I feel that has been doing quite well in Asia for the last couple of years is definitely like French electro, French house. I feel like, you can see many French DJs, artists come through with promoters and club parties, and I feel like they always do well, they always sell well. And we can see that translating back into streams as well, like when the show is happening or after the show, and we can definitely see like a pickup in streams. So yeah, these two genres definitely for Asia.
Awesome. And how familiar, Jon, do you think Southeast Asia or Singapore is with French culture and French music?
I think to be honest, not that much. I think we're more familiar with French fashion brands for sure. But in terms of French music, it's not very widely popular here. But from what I know, I think adding on to Natasha's point about hip hop and rap being pretty much, I would say, like one of the first genres that could actually bring French music over to Asia. I think she's absolutely right. Because from what I know, like they just brought Def Jam Southeast Asia. They just started that in this part of the world, and I think one of their top rappers is actually he's half Malay and half French. And he raps in French as well. So the artist's name is called Sona One. He's from Malaysia, and his most recent album, he actually did a song that was in half Malay and half French. And he's a friend of mine, so he told me like he didn't really care that maybe his audience in Malaysia didn't understand the French part of the songs, but they would at least understand the Malay part of the songs, and then the terms
Sorry, Jon. I also just wanted to add that actually the funny thing is I think that a lot of people in Singapore or Southeast Asia actually might not realize that the artist is French. So like, a lot of people don't know that Justice, like it's French, a lot of people don't know, and they love that music, and maybe it's like just also a lack of awareness that they are French, but maybe if they know that they're French, they'll be like, oh, actually I do know some French artists. I do like French music,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's the kind of
Yeah.
thing where I guess, here in Asia, we it's hard for us to tell. I mean, in terms of like, we're not very educated in terms of our palette for to really differentiate between French and the other parts of Europe. I think sometimes it's not really within what we're exposed to over here. So yeah, I think it's a lot to do with education and awareness. As the first step.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, really good point. And I guess another question is, how much does it matter that it is French, or does it not matter based on the genre, right? There's some genres that are a little bit more vocally driven, where I guess it is more of an obvious point that it is French. And then in Vietnam, there is a French history there. How clued in do you think Vietnamese kids are about French culture these days, Esther?
I would say from the young population, probably not much. I think it was anything before 1965. Then there's everyone knew about the French music and everyone romanticized about it, and but after that, then I think French music isn't much in existence in the young demographics.
What about the language? How much of that is still recognizable and translatable?
Not much as well. I mean, I would say it would be my father's age or my grandparents' age who all understood French. So again, it's pre-65 or that age demographic. So I would say I think the young demographic have not been fully exposed to French music, or if they have, they don't know that it is French music.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Natasha's point. Yeah. Awesome. And how much do you think live has an impact? I know it's a strange thing to talk about now that we're all on lockdown, but there was a time when we were touring, and there will be a time again where we will be touring. How much of a benefit or impact does actually physically being present in the market have in each of your markets? Iichiro, would you like to start? So Japan, like, what are the opportunities? What is the impact?
For a French artist, you mean, right?
Yeah. French artists, international artists.
Yeah, basically, like our Japanese concert and film live market is pretty large, with along with the physical. So the Japanese market, like Japanese live, people are trying to do the bigger concert in every cities, and they sell the CDs at the venue by itself, by hand to hand still, and those makes a lot of physical sales on board, as you see in the physical numbers. So like to to monetize the live is a little bit hard, even if you tour in Japan. They actually monetize it by selling the merchandise a lot. So the being in Japan and doing live is probably going to be one of the promotional use to make local fans deeply inside, to meet face to face with the fellows that you actually play with, so artist friends. That's how I think that's one of the way, and that's one of the most important part to do live in Japan for the foreign artists coming in, so that they can start being a friend with each other, and then do another tour with another artist, kind of. So it's like more a connection basis for the live. It's just very too hard to just come into the live and just simply earn money there, monetize there. It doesn't work that way, because even the Japanese musician doesn't do that anyway.
I would say that's the same in
How important is it
Vietnam,
to have a
less
local
the CDs.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Esther, go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna say it's the same in Vietnam, less minus the CD, the physical sales. It's no one. I don't think an artist can make money with live events, international artists make money in Vietnam for live events. So it's definitely the same in Japan, just the connection, having that, visibility and in the country.
Not. I just want to say that, of course, if it's the major signed artist, it's a little bit different because,
Right.
yeah. But in terms of independent artists that I talk to, like middle size or not that popular in Japan or localized artists, then I think that's one of the case.
Yeah.
Just to make sure. I mean, obviously the biggest, like nominated artists, of course they will pay.
Yeah.
Not that we can afford everything, but like, yeah.
And how important in both of these markets is it, like, to have a local partner if you're going to invest in coming and performing live, to make the most of that? And what would the local partner help you do?
Vietnam, it's an absolute must because you have to go through authorities, government, all of that stuff. So it's absolute must to find a local partner.
And in terms of marketing and promotion around it, because I mean, I assume just coming and playing a show, even if you've worked with a promoter, is probably not that impactful.
Right, exactly.
So you'd get like a local partner to
do everything from the authorization to the marketing, the promotions, the meet and greets, everything. I would say it's super important for it to be a success. Yeah.
Great. And Iichiro, the same thing in Japan? Are there local partners to work with?
Yeah, it's more. I mean, when I talk about those events and that, it's like middle size to, or like live house venue kind of event. It's usually the event promoter, event organizer is the only way to go, probably.
And the event organizer would also help with all of the other, like, promotion and marketing, or
basically promoting the events, not actually like, sending out for like this DSP or whatever. That doesn't work that way. It's just for the event. So it's more for the event. What they do is usually for the event, not for the artists.
Okay. Are there other agencies locally that can help with DSP pitching and things like that?
Yeah, not many, but yeah, probably like local labels can do that. So it's like, there's no like particular agent or like particular promoter. It's very hard to find in Japan because it's usually all those function was done by labels, like major labels are usually doing that. And the independent field has just started, so now it's constructing. So there are a few labels that are actually doing similar thing for like overseas, helping out each other for the label, like middle-sized label, and they do events and they do barter. Like when they go outside from Japan, they help you. Yeah, that kind of thing is started to happen. And
I've seen a bit of that around the region, like between Japan and China and Japan and Korea.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, those small ones are starting to do that kind of move right now, but it's just started, I think.
Yeah, well, potentially an opportunity there for the future as well.
Yeah, so I'm telling a lot of my friends that do that kind of thing for the promoter, because I can introduce a lot of the, I know like everybody thinks that it's very hard to enter into Japanese market, and I definitely there's a need for that to like visit to Japan market. Yeah.
And then Singapore and Southeast Asia, Jon, to your experience, are there any best practices or impacts or things that make a live experience that much more impactful?
I mean, so far, I don't think for me, I do know of much case studies that has actually happened, but and I think moving forward is going to be very, very different as well. I think the best way to actually do the live experience right now is actually online. As much as I don't like to admit it, but I think it seems to be the best option at the moment. Collaborating online, doing online collaborations for YouTube, or even just tracks, lyric videos to go out on DSP platforms. I think that's pretty much the first step that can be taken. I still stand by reaching out to people via social media, just to connect, and just sharing music and just communicating. That would actually be the most effective first step. and then subsequently it's just seeing what each other could help with either platforms, with either parties, seeing like, oh, what can we do to get your music into France, and what can we do to get your music into Asia? I think that's it kind of works like a barter trade at this point of time, especially for independent artists. But I think that's how it actually grows. It grows slowly that way.
Artist to artist. Cool. Did any of you guys have anything else to add or showcase about your markets, or advice to the community about how to best engage with your market before we put this over to Q&A? Any final thoughts or words or tips?
I think from a DSP point of view, we at Deezer, we have a lot of editors that look after, different genres. And even though a lot of labels, a lot of artist management have been quite strategic in hitting up the right editors when it comes to specific genres. And I feel like that is definitely probably one of the most efficient ways of working, because even if you're not hitting up the right editor, the chances are that the editor can refer you to the right one. And we have global editors at Deezer that look after global genres, and they look after worldwide playlists with hundreds and thousands of listeners. And you might not be placed on like a #1 track, you might not be placed on the top 10 even, but I think even just getting placement in somewhere in the 20 or 30s, you will be able to see quite a significant spike in the listenership of that artist for sure.
And are there any particular playlists that are more popular in Asia?
Yeah, I would say definitely. Obviously, it's like genre specific, but we have a pop one, like a hits playlist, and that is definitely the biggest playlist in Deezer. It's predominantly pop songs, but sometimes they do add some like secret songs in there that are like not hits. But so we actually worked with like Tabitha Nauza. She's like a Singaporean artist, and earlier this year, and she released an EP, and she was having a chat with me, and I was telling her, the thing is, we are not very active in Asia, so if you want to partner, if you want to come up with a partnership with Deezer, it would definitely be more of an export strategy. So we basically work together in identifying key playlists on Deezer that would suit her music. And so I didn't reach out to all the editors. I just spoke directly to one or two key editors on Deezer and said, hey, I'm recommending this track for this playlist. You should check it out. And also because I think the key factor is if that artist has a very international and exportable sound that is not too local, then it fits in very perfectly with this kind of playlist, because then it would be quite seamless in that playlist. And so when we were analyzing the data, we saw that there was a spike in, the number of followers that she had on her profile, the number of listeners that she had on her music. And so I think sometimes it's more of like a strategic partnership rather than a like mass send to all. Yeah.
That's awesome. It's great to hear that Singaporean artist was getting exposure like that as well.
Yeah.
And Esther, just back to you on the Vietnam market, because I know YouTube and Facebook are, like you mentioned, especially YouTube, a key platform. Are there specific channels that the Vietnamese? Oops. I'm sure she'll join back on momentarily. But yeah, Jon, anything more about opportunities that can be done with Zendyll?
I actually think if you're a French producer or songwriter, just sending beats over to Zendyll, we have connection with a lot of artists here, just being able to get them exposed, it doesn't necessarily need to be artist to artist. It could also be French artists looking for producers and songwriters here in the Asia region, and actually giving them a feature, as a producer, that actually, in my opinion, would actually help, because it does raise the profile, and, it gets the word spread amongst the community first, before it actually gets the attention of DSP partners and eventually, I guess, brands and promoters. I think that's another way that could could spearhead this process, because yeah, a lot of it is just going back to the creative work itself, not like finding a very organic process to make music together, rather than saying like, hey, let's work together. I know nothing about your music, you know nothing about mine, but we're going to collaborate just because we want to break into each other's market. I think that's another way of going about it, is to work with producers and songwriters.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And Esther, you're back.
So sorry.
Right. Yeah, I was just asking you about if there are any specific channels on YouTube or groups on Facebook, or because YouTube is such a huge platform. So is there any way we can kind of narrow it back, narrow it down further for the Vietnamese market?
No, absolutely. So I would suggest Pot's Music, which is, I would say, like the Vivo of Vietnam. It's the #1, probably top 5 channels of the country. So working with us, and then we'll, collaborate or promote the video, your music video, or a new artist, and we can do some live events on the channel. So there's, I would say that would probably be the biggest, fastest shortcut for new artists.
Do you have any specific examples of international artists who have successfully broken out, not just French, but any international artists that have successfully built their audience in Vietnam?
We've had a few Thai groups. I don't have the name at the top of my head, but they were some Thai artists, and they saw from their data and from all the information that they got from data tracking who their users or their fan base was, and they found that they had a huge one in Vietnam. And so they reached out to us, and then we worked with them, and we set up a whole meet and greet and for their fans here in Vietnam. And so it was a huge success for them. And we continue to do that, mostly from artists around the region.
Oh, great. And Iichiro, you predominantly work with Japanese content, right? But have you had any examples of international artists you think who have done successful break into Japan?
For 2019, I don't recognize like the special cases for the foreign countries. Like last year, it was like they were Queen, obviously, like they had the movies and Ed Sheeran, Daddy Yankees. So it's actually the same. I mean, not the same. Okay, yeah, it's basically the world chart followed by Japanese artists.
Got it.
Yeah.
And then we do have a question here from the chat. And I think maybe, Natasha, you might be good to answer this, but anybody else can feel free and jump in. But how complicated or simple is it to pitch local DSPs from abroad or access important playlists? Does it have to go through a local partner? So I guess that's open to anybody.
I think for DSPs, definitely there is a stronger chance that we would pick up that music if it came from a digital distributor or a label. And I think mostly because of a resource issue, because, I think realistically, for example, like I'm not going to have enough time to go through individual emails, and sometimes you see it, but because it's not prioritized, that it just kind of gets put in the backlog. So I think definitely, even if it's a digital distributor like Viocha or Believe, or someone there's someone specifically that is constantly bugging us about it or flagging it to us, it's definitely a lot more difficult if you are just flagging on your own.
Yeah, that makes sense. Anything more to add to that, Esther or Iichiro or Jon, in your experiences?
Yeah, I mean, it's similar. I mean, like we often do like every week meeting with the DSP. I mean, we do the priority list and everything, forwarded to each DSPs locally. So it's probably harder if you just email or direct message. That well, sometime it might work, but I think it's better for the local it's better to use local aggregator or labels that actually have the deeper relation between the DSP.
Yeah. Absolutely, because we're there to kind of recommend what's going on, what's hot and trending. So that's definitely the right way.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, Jon, have you had any experiences of trying to go direct to any platforms with your content, or you pretty much go through?
We pretty much go through a DSP, and I think sometimes we do strategic partnerships with some of them. Specific for campaigns. Specific for certain releases as well. So yeah, I mean, I guess to answer the question, I think it's still easier to go through a local partner. So even for us, if we were to do something in Malaysia, for example, I would still work with a local partner. I think that at least for the first couple of times, before the relationship and that trust has been established, it's always easier to work with a local partner, especially if it's targeted for that region.
Makes total sense. Great. Well, I thought that this was hugely informative. Thank you, everybody, for your input. I'll wait one more minute here to check if anybody else has any additional questions. Feel free to add them into the live comments section. All right. Looks like you gave them everything they needed to know. Nice one. And I believe we'll all be around afterwards for some one-on-one meetings as well. So thank you all for your time. It was truly a pleasure chatting with you guys this afternoon. And yeah, I look forward to hopefully seeing you all someplace sometime soon.
Thank you very much. Thank you,
Thanks, Priya.
and thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Keep posted. Thank you, everyone, and you can watch the replay. Bye-bye.
Okay,
Bye.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
bye, guys.